the island of Tenerife in the Canaries. Its beaches lure sun-starved vacationers from all over northern Europe. High above the beaches, literally up in the clouds, is Tenerife's Los Rodeos Airport, now rarely used since it became the most notorious airport in the world. 1,000 people have lost their lives here in airline accidents. The reason? Los Rodeos is shrouded in clouds on most days. Sunday, March 27, 1977, was just such a day. Flying to the Canaries were two jumbo jets, Boeing 747s, both charter flights. One was a Pan American plane full of tourists. The other, a Dutch jet from KLM Airlines. One of the many strange things about that day was that neither pilot had set out for Tenerife.
We were starting our descent for the approach and landing at Las Palmas, our original destination. And as we were doing that, we got a call from air traffic control to divert immediately to Tenerife.
When a terrorist bomb exploded on the next island, this small airport suddenly became choked with planes. The co-pilot on the Pan Am Jumbo was Bob Bragg. It's the first time he's been back to Los Rodeos since that Sunday in 1977. 20 years later, bits of his plane still lie all around.
When we landed here, the entire ramp was completely and totally congested. There were probably 20 to 30 airplanes that had also diverted and were parked here, which necessitated us having to go way down to the end here and park.
By now, there are 400 people who've been up all night, past the day before, possibly, and they don't quite understand what's going on. And our information was certainly limited at that point. We really didn't know the circumstances or what had actually transpired. The facilities on board, I suppose, by now were a little, well, it was busy, let me put it that way, and everybody was restless.
The Dutch pilot, Captain Van Zanten, was getting restless too. His plane was parked alongside the Pan Am, and the American pilots could hear him constantly on the radio, anxious to be on his way before he ran out of flying hours.
He was very irritated about the situation, as I'm sure all of us were, because most of us had been flying all night long, and we were all anxious to get to our destination. Basically, about that time, he decided to start refueling. Concurrent with that, they opened up the airport at Las Palmas. So the engineer and I got out and walked and measured the wingtip clearance between the KLM 747 and our 747. And we found out that we were about 12 feet short of being able to get around him and taxi out. So we had to wait for the KLM airplane to refuel.
The two aircraft were parked at the wrong end of the runway for takeoff. With so many planes choking the airport, the only way to get to the correct end was by taxiing up the runway itself. Drawing on the investigators' report, this simulation recreates the accident. Air traffic control ordered the KLM to go first and wait when it got to the far end. The Pan Am would follow, but would turn off the runway about 3/4 of the way down to let the KLM take off.
By the time we got the clearance that we were going to leave and take off, people were very happy by then. They were quite elated. These were people who were going to meet a cruise ship in the Canary Islands and cruise around the Mediterranean. And a lot of them were senior citizens that had come from California.
As the Pan Am entered the runway, clouds began to roll down from the surrounding hills. The American pilots soon found themselves inching through the dense mist, looking for their turnoff. By now, the KLM pilot had already reached the far end, turned, and was anxious to be on his way.
The tower called us and asked were we off the runway, and I said negative, we were still on the runway, but we will report clear of the runway. We looked up and we saw the KLM airplane's lights, and I immediately saw the lights shaking, and I said, I think he's moving. And then it was very obvious that he was moving. so I started yelling, get off, get off. And the captain turned the airplane, went to full power on the throttle. As we were turning, I looked back out of the right window and couldn't believe it, that he was doing what he was doing. And I'll never forget, I saw the rotating beacon underneath the belly of the airplane. I closed my eyes and ducked. And I didn't even think he'd done us any damage. There was very little noise, very little shaking or anything.
I was just very, very aware of things in slow motion, and everything was flying around, and all of a sudden everything settled, and nothing looked like it had before. I didn't see anything I recognized. There were no people around.
When I looked up, it was obvious that he had done us a lot of damage. The windows were completely gone. I looked back to the right wing was on fire. I looked back to the left, and the entire upper deck lounge was gone. We had 28 people up there, and there was nothing left. It looked like someone had taken a big knife and just sliced the entire top of the airplane off. I could see all the way to the tail of the airplane. So I reached down to try to shut off the engines with the start levers, which controls the fuel to the engines. That didn't do any good. Obviously, all the controls were severed. Then I reached up to get the fire control handles, which is up top, which shuts the engines down. And that's when I discovered that the top of the cockpit was gone. I looked around. There was no side of the cockpit left. So I stood up and elected to jump over the side, which was about 48 feet.
Dorothy Kelly found herself in the cargo hold, but managed to climb to the top of the blazing plane.
I looked over the side, and it was like looking out of the second floor window from my house with nothing but jagged metal, and my thought was, by now I had lost my shoes. I could survive this, and I'm going to kill myself jumping out of here on all that debris down there.
When Dorothy Kelly jumped from a blazing plane, she broke an arm, fractured her skull, and became a heroine by rescuing the captain and tending the passengers.
People were lying all over the field, hurt, certainly bloody, very, very badly injured. One thing I remember particularly, there was a man who had his clothes almost completely blown off, and he was just wandering around in a daze, and I remember I kept trying to push him off to the side and get him away, and he would just keep coming right back into, while the action, people were just banging in at the windows and shouting, and you could hear shouts, screams from inside. And that was probably my most vivid memory, and what has hurt the most through all those years is remembering all those people and hearing them scream and realizing that they were being burned, and they were not going to get out because there was no way we could get to them.
Tenerife remains the world's worst air disaster. 583 people died. Everyone aboard the KLM plane, which burned up on the runway, and all but 77 of the Pan Am passengers. Paul Royce, one of Pan Am's senior captains, helped investigate the crash. Among the records are the charred instruments from the Pan Am jumbo jet. The day after the disaster, Royce arrived in Tenerife with other American investigators. Their first job was to listen to radio messages between the air traffic control tower and the two planes. Right away, Royce heard something that grabbed his attention.
There was a point at which you could not tell what the KLM first officer was saying, and we asked that that be played over several times. It was obvious that the man was under stress. His voice changed its timbre. It became tremulous. It was slightly shaky, and his words were blurted out rather than spoken clearly. And that was a benchmark. That caught our attention right away. I believe that the first officer's voice changed because he saw something happening in the cockpit that shouldn't be happening.
The cockpit voice recorder from the KLM plane furnished the next clue to the mystery. As the KLM plane reached the end of the runway and turned, Captain Van Zanten immediately pushed up the throttles to take off.
First officer said, no, wait a minute, you don't have our air traffic control clearance. The captain said, yes, I know that. Pulled the throttles back. Now go ahead and call for it.
The tower gave Captain air traffic control clearance, which tells him only what route to follow. To actually take off, Van Zanten had to ask permission, but he never got that far.
As the first officer was reading the clearance back to the controllers, the captain again commenced the takeoff. He pushed the throttles up. He said, we go. The aircraft started to roll. The first officer sensed that this was not right. He knew that they hadn't been cleared for takeoff, and so he blurted out, and we are taken off, or we are at takeoff. It wasn't even that clear. The words are difficult to comprehend, and the tenor of the voice changes. It's obviously very tense. But he felt that he had done his part in letting people know that they were commencing their takeoff. All this time, the Dutch airplane was accelerating down the runway. The flight engineer in the Dutch cockpit heard the words from the Pan Am airplane saying, Roger will advise when we're clear, and he questioned the captain and the first officer. He said, then, is he not clear then? In the Pan American. And both crew members said, yeah, he's clear. At that point, they were just entering the heavy cloud. They saw the Pan Am aircraft desperately trying to get off the runway, but it was not in time. The rest is history.
Yeah. Computer. Where is that located?
That's over here. Let me take a look.
I just want to know where it's located to get a
Under international regulations, the investigation was conducted by the Spanish, but both the Americans and the Dutch were allowed to take part. The investigators soon reached different conclusions.
That is in that area as well. That's right. That and the fuel flow check.
The Dutch were, in my opinion, searching for something to fasten onto that would divert the blame from their own countrymen. Mainly, I believe they tried to pin the blame on the air traffic controllers. To some extent, they tried to pin the blame on the Pan Am crew.
The stakes were high, not only for KLM, but for their most famous captain, Jacob Van Zanten, the very pilot whose face stared out of the KLM ads.
Captain Van Zanten was a pilot of great prestige in KLM. He was a top instructor pilot. In fact, he was so well regarded in KLM that it's my understanding when the Dutch officials, or the KLM officials, first heard about this accident, they tried to find Van Zanten to ask him to come down and be part of the investigation team. Unfortunately, of course, he wasn't available.
The Spanish investigators ruled the accident was caused by the Dutch captain taking off without clearance, a basic error caused by his anxiety to get on his way. But a Dutch board of inquiry absolved Van Zanten and placed blame on a simple misunderstanding with air traffic control. The pilot thought he had his clearance. Paul Royce blames the turbulent personality of Captain Van Zanten.
He was a difficult man to contradict, especially for a junior pilot such as the first officer on this flight. He did have the courage to stop him once when the captain first started the throttles up, but I don't think he felt he could get away with it again.
United is one of the world's biggest airlines. After Tenerife, the buzzwords around here became CLR, Cockpit Leadership Resource. Every airline now has its own such program, costing millions of dollars.
And a couple things that kind of facilitate...
Professors are telling pilots how to get along with each other and with the flight attendants, once seen as second-class citizens. The idea was greeted with some skepticism.
And then we finally got into the CLR concept a couple of years ago. So the pilots, you guys have been going through CLR since when?
Well, when I went through CLR, I thought it was the biggest bunch of hooey ever to come down the pike. I since changed my mind on it. But there was one section where the 5 pilots jumped on the other pilot and made a list of adjectives that described this particular pilot once it was all over. And I had a list of about 25 adjectives that described me that my compatriots had given me, and I took it home and showed it to my wife, and she went down the list, and she said, oh, yeah, oh, yeah, that's you, wow.
And you said it is not, right?
And I said, it is not, yeah. And, thinking about it, I said, well, see, maybe it is.
Looking back years ago, I think that door between the cockpit and cabin served more purposes than just to divide those two areas.
Sort of a psychological barrier, perhaps?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I don't feel that anymore.
Okay.
This is a mock evacuation after an emergency landing. Pilots see firsthand the tough part of a flight attendant's job. Through training like this, airlines are trying to weed out the kind of behavior that kills. But no one can say for sure if this program saves lives. Meanwhile, pilot error remains the cause of 70% of all airline accidents, a figure that's rising. Aircraft manufacturers have tried to fix that problem by designing the pilot out of the cockpit. This is the first fully automated plane, flown by a computer. On January 20th, 1992, a TV reporter in eastern France heard rumors of a plane crash in the mountains nearby. While officials pondered what to do, the journalist displayed remarkable initiative. He found the plane and the survivors by literally following his nose.
There was a smell of fumes, of kerosene fumes. So we decided to go in the forest, just following the smell. And just a few minutes later we heard some voice calling, and we discovered the survivors around the fire. They were badly injured for some of them, and asking desperately for rescue. It's the main thing I can remember. Every minute somebody was asking for rescues. When are they coming? When are they coming to help us?
Ici, il y a des blessés. On n'en peut plus.
A young child about 10 years. He was in the arms of a man, and it was very emotional to see the people waiting for more than 4 hours, and alone in the forest and in the snow and in the cold, and it was very terrible. I had a phone in my pocket, so the first thing I did arriving there was to call for the fire station and saying, I'm journalist, I'm at the place where the plane crashed, and you have to come. The first survivor to be taken away from the site was a little girl of 18 months, and a gendarme took him in his arm and took her to the ambulance. And then, little by little, the survivors being able to walk were evacuated. Then others being injured had to wait for hours. And we know now that at least 2 people died during that time.
The plane they were on was an A320 Airbus belonging to Air Inter, the French domestic airline. It was flying from Lyon to Strasbourg when it plowed into a mountaintop, the third catastrophe involving the world's most advanced aircraft in less than 4 years. The A320 was revolutionary. Unveiled in 1988, it was the first civilian fly-by-wire aircraft. Traditionally, a pilot had direct control over his plane through cables or hydraulics linked directly to his control column. But not in the A320. The pilot would feed instructions to a computer, and it would fly the plane. The pilot would then just monitor the computer. Electronic displays dominated the new so-called glass cockpit, and the control column was replaced by a side stick, like those on a computer game.
D1, DR,
Computers were cheaper.
D2.
They saved one man in the cockpit and could manage fuel more efficiently. And they were safer. They would review the pilot's actions and block what they considered dangerous maneuvers.
For the first time in aviation history, pilots had no longer an indisputed and direct access to the flight controls of their aircraft, but were dependent on what the construction engineers programmed into the software of the steering computers. The manufacturer defined what pilot input would be adequate and safe. And this design philosophy was the first step to the elimination of the pilot.
All the new American jets now flew with the cutting-edge technology of the A320. But it aroused suspicion among traditional stick-and-rudder men. Heino Caesar, Lufthansa's chief safety pilot, was unimpressed by the computerized controls, especially the so-called side stick.
And the pilot can place his hand on that stick, and he can't feel how the autoflight system is steering his aircraft. Boeing, much more conventional, pilot-centered, still puts the old-fashioned control column between the pilot's legs, and he doesn't have to look at his artificial horizon, he doesn't have to look at his instruments, he just places the hand on the control column, and he looks outside or talks with the stewardess or talks with somebody else or something like that, and he knows just by placing the hand on the control wheel exactly what his aircraft is doing. Everything. And in these advanced aircraft, you can't feel it anymore. You are restricted to your highly claimed optical channel. You have to pick up everything optical. You can't hear anything. You can't smell anything. You can't feel anything. You have to look at some instrument.
A strange series of incidents followed, involving the computer doing things the pilot didn't expect it to do. The first took place at an air show in France, with a plane flown by Air France's star A320 pilot. Miraculously, the pilot survived. 3 passengers did not. The official report blamed the pilot for flying too low, but he claimed he tried to climb while the computer wanted to land. The computer won. In 1991, passengers on a German Airbus had a terrifying flight into Moscow. A computer simulation of what happened was made by investigators from the plane's flight recorder. The pilot was told by the Moscow tower to go round, to abort his landing and try again. In such circumstances, the computer is programmed to put the plane into a steep climb. Too steep, thought the pilot, and he tried to push the nose down. The computers pushed it even higher. As a result of this tug-of-war, the official report concluded the plane almost came to a stop in midair. Despite 4 terrifying stalls, it landed safely. Other planes had brushes with death, like this one over Paris in 1994, when a Romanian pilot fought the computer for control of his aircraft. It began to look as if automation had simply replaced pilot error with another kind. On the night of January 20th, 1992, an Air Inter A320 was approaching Strasbourg over the mountains of eastern France. Based on the official report, this Air Inter A320 captain recreates that flight, and the small but fatal mistake it's believed was made as the plane began its descent. These dials program the computer. This is what should have happened. The pilot enters the angle of descent he wants, 3.3 degrees FPA. That same dial has two functions. It also governs vertical speed, VS. If the pilot left it in the wrong mode, he actually told the computer to descend at 3,300 feet per minute.
Well, it's difficult to pick up that kind of an error from the displays that are available now. There is a label about which mode you're in, but it's hard to see. You're not used to looking at that. Eventually, the mismatch will produce surprising effects in the airplane's behavior. The rate of descent will be higher than you expected. But if you're busy at that time, or if the flight crew is not working together as well, some other factors are happening. You may have a delayed detection of that unexpected aircraft behavior. And these things can happen very fast in an aircraft. 45 seconds may be all the time window that you have to realize that what you expect to be going on is not what's really going on, and the aircraft is being flown into a hazardous situation.
Sur les mètres. Ok, on rappelle le moment final.
87 people died in the crash of the A320. Only 8 survived. Automation seemed to only compound the problem of pilot error. Pilots were having trouble deciphering their strong but silent partner in the cockpit.
And they say things like, what's it doing now? What's it going to do next? How in the world did we get into this mode? How do I stop it from doing this? Why won't it do what I want? And I know there's a way to get it to do what I want. These are all indications of a breakdown in coordination, in team play between the automation and the flight crew.
The problem isn't going to go away.
This flight management system is on all of the modern airplanes by all of the different manufacturers, whether the MD-11, the Boeing family, 757, 767, or the new 777, the Airbus series. All of these flight management systems impose the same kinds of roles and challenges for the flight crew. Yes, there's detailed differences, but overall, the same challenges apply regardless of the specific type of modern aircraft. All of the modern aircraft are vulnerable to this kind of a scenario.
The pilot's days may be numbered. The technology exists to do away with him altogether, and some would argue to do so. But not, of course, the pilots themselves. When the computer chips are down, they believe they're the only ones who can get us out of trouble.
Okay, go ahead and recover. And just push the side stick right over there toward the forward corner of the aircraft.
It is absolutely wrong to judge man in the cockpit as the absolute weakest link. He is of absolute flexibility, superseding any computer, and he is the only flexible link in the chain of events. If you are looking at the 14 million departures we are having every year, in hundreds and thousands of cases, the pilots prevented the accident by their action.
And recover.
only in very, very few cases they failed. And this amount up to approximately 15 total losses a year, with an average of 500 deaths.
Air travel has never been safer. The number of people killed in accidents is about the same now as in 1947, despite a 1,000-fold increase in air traffic. And that's largely thanks to the air crash detectives. We may come to look back on this as a golden age. In 10 years, our skies will be so crowded, experts fear that twice as many people may die in crashes.
Well, most of us can walk, most of us can drive, and most of us can swim, but most of us can't fly. And I think there's always will be a fascination with flight. And there is just, I think, with the average person, that little sinking feeling in their stomach when they're at 30,000 feet and they're not in control. And so I think there's a fascination there. And there's a strong interest that this world that we've joined together through aviation, that we can keep it together by having people feel comfortable that they can get on an airplane any place, anytime, and fly safely from point A to point B. And we do an excellent job ensuring that when accidents do happen, we investigate them thoroughly, be sure they don't ever happen again.
One comforting thought. If you boarded a jet at random every single day, it would be 26,000 years on average before you were involved in a major crash. And even then, the odds are you'd survive.
Coming up, the dreaded tsunami can smash a building like it's made of matchsticks. Now experts are developing a system to detect the lethal waves. But will it work? T-Tech has the answer next from TLC.
Down to beat
the Disney Institute. For your free video, call 1-800-654-8666 today.
You won't believe what you can do. All the things that you can try.
Imagine a vacation where you can try your hand at animation, gourmet cooking, or TV production.
Look around and you will see all the things that you can be.
Call now and discover the fun of a Disney Institute vacation. A place where you can do what you've always dreamed of, plus things you never thought you'd do. All in its own resort community near the Walt Disney World theme parks. This is a limited time video offer, so call 1-800-654-8666 today.
You won't believe what you can. I can't believe I'm doing
the one down to beat
the Disney Institute. For your free video, call 1-800-654-8666 today.
You won't believe what you can do. All the things that you can try.
Imagine a vacation where you can try your hand at animation, gourmet cooking, or TV production.
Look around and you will see all the things that you can be, all the ways that you can.
Call now and discover the fun of a Disney Institute vacation. A place where you can do what you've always dreamed of, plus things you never thought you'd do. All in its own resort community near the Walt Disney World theme parks. This is a limited time video offer, so call 1-800-654-8666 today.
You won't believe